please subscribe and don't forget to press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video.
The Dow today closing just shy of 23,000, about 2.5 points shy after hitting that milestone earlier in this session. Are there still investment opportunities here? Let's ask Richard Bernstein. He joins us now. He's a CNBC contributor from Richard Bernstein Advisors. Creative name, Rich, but thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Let's talk a little bit about the fact, as I like how you put it, we're 8 years into the bull market that people are just waking up to. That's still true. That's been true all along, but it's still true here, isn't it?
It is, Kelly. I think this has been an amazing bull market in that people have been so scarred by 2008 that they're more scared that 2008 is about to repeat during this cycle than ever looking for opportunities to invest. And I just don't understand how people expect to build wealth under the desk in the fetal position. That's just not what capitalism is all about.
Well, we'll talk about this later, but I actually see people getting back into the housing market sooner than they seem to get back into the stock market. And we've been burned by housing a lot more recently, although I guess maybe it happened at the same time. And what do you think about that?
Well, you know, that's definitely true. I mean, real estate is perceived, oddly enough, to be somewhat safe. People think that there's a stable income stream and things like that. But what's very interesting is that REITs, if you will, if you use that as a proxy for real estate investing, have been acting more and more like bonds and less like real estate. So there's actually because so much money has flooded into the sector, there's actually changes going on in the way the sector is behaving.
Rich, if we sort of grant the point that maybe the public hasn't re-engaged with stocks, at least emotionally, the way they have in past cycles, clearly as somebody who focuses on fundamentals, it's possible that if they ever come back and become very interested, it'll be at an extremely expensive market, or maybe the fundamentals won't be there. What are you actually kind of foreseeing in terms of how the remainder of this cycle plays out? Are you just playing for that kind of overshoot in a bull market, or are the fundamentals still there to justify things?
Well, there's two things in what you just said there, Michael. Number one is that, people tend to come into the equity market in droves in the bottom of the ninth inning with 2 outs and 2 strikes on the batter. You have to remember that's when equities are the most popular, is right at the peak, which is the bottom of the ninth with 2 strikes and 2 outs. I think that's going to happen in this cycle, too. Whenever that happens, that's the environment, the sentiment environment that we'll see. However, you know, somebody, when I was in the green room before, somebody said that this is a liquidity-driven market. And I agree that there is a lot of liquidity out there, but this is not just a liquidity-driven market. The earnings are accelerating not only in the United States but around the world, and you don't hear enough about that relative to the liquidity that's out there.
I think that's a good point, but fortunately we have a deluge of earnings upon us for the next couple days, and maybe we'll play that up a little bit more. Rich, thank you very much for joining us.
Sure, thanks for having me.
Good to get your thoughts. Richard Bernstein. We have some developments on the travel ban, or lack thereof. Eamon Javers is at the White House with those. Eamon?
Yeah, Kelly, that's right. The White House is now reacting to that federal judge in Hawaii that took a step to block the president's travel ban, the latest version of the travel ban, which the White House has been trying to get put through throughout the course of this year. Sarah Huckabee Sanders now issuing a statement in response to that, and she says today's dangerously flawed district court order undercuts the president's efforts to keep the American people safe and enforce minimum security standards for entry into the United States. She goes on to say the Department of Justice will vigorously defend the president's lawful action. The proclamation restricting travel was issued after an extensive worldwide security review by the Secretary of Homeland Security and following consultation by the president with the members of the cabinet, including Secretaries of Homeland Security, State, Defense, and the Attorney General. So the administration here indicating that they are going to continue to defend this in court, but the Hawaii judge now taking a step to block the current version of the travel ban, Kelly.
All right, Eamon, thank you for now. We'll keep following it. Eamon Javers is there at the White House. The U.S. government also planned to hit Canadian jet maker Bombardier with a 300% tariff after Boeing complained it was selling a plane at an unfairly low price. Now Bombardier has made a deal that could help it avoid that hit, and we'll explain how that would work coming up. Amazon is striking a deal of its own to install delivery locker systems in apartments run by some of the nation's biggest landlords. Our fast take on that when we come right back.
Video game.
This This close. That's how close we got. 2.5 points away from closing above 23,000 on the Dow today. We did touch it earlier in the session. But let's get to Sue Herrera at this hour for a CNBC News update. Sue?
Hi, Kelly. Thanks so much. Here's what's happening at this hour, everyone. Market pundit Mark Faber is under fire today for comments in his latest Gloom, Boom, and Doom newsletter. Faber wrote, quote, "Thank God white people populated America, and America has, quote, enjoyed 200 years in the economic and political sun under a white majority." Faber told CNBC, quote, "If stating some historical facts makes me a racist, then I suppose that I am a racist," end quote. Faber, who often appears on business news channels, including CNBC, has been kicked off the board of Sprott after that commentary. No comment yet from the other companies that have Faber as a director. We have reached out to all of them. A federal judge in Hawaii has blocked major parts of President Trump's latest travel ban. That ban was set to go into effect early tomorrow, barring most nationals of Syria, Libya, Iran, Yemen, Chad, and Somalia. The ruling does not apply to the part of the ban restricting travel by certain North Koreans and Venezuelans. The White House says the decision is wrong, and it will vigorously defend the ban. Scandal star Kerry Washington will be an executive producer on a drama series for Facebook. Set on the south side of Chicago, it's called 5 Points, and it will present 5 points of view of the same event, according to Variety. It will air on Watch, which is Facebook's new platform for original shows. And Google Maps will no longer tell you how many calories you might burn following a route. The experimental feature gave automatic estimates for walking a route in calories and mini cupcake equivalents. But users complained about potential inaccuracy and the inability to turn it off, and the pressure of counting calories. Or in my case, mini cupcakes. It's a lot. It is a lot of pressure. You see, like,
or
20
mini chocolate chip
cupcakes. You're like,
scones.
exactly. Exactly.
I was
Kelly.
thinking this morning, I was eyeing one, and I thought, I wonder how many calories in that. Is it 100? Is it 200? Is it 400?
I know.
You know, what's too much for an unnecessary? Anyway, Sue, thank you very much.
You got it. See you tomorrow.
All right, our Sue Herrera. Airbus is striking a deal with Bombardier over its C-Series aircraft, and some say the deal looks like a bailout. Phil LeBeau is here to explain. Phil?
Well, certainly it's causing controversy with Boeing. You know, we saw just, a half hour ago, Boeing issuing another statement saying, we're not going to let this deal go by without some people fighting it in Washington, and certainly Boeing fighting it. Here's the deal, essentially. Airbus will take a majority stake in the C-Series plane. They're going to basically run everything in terms of sales.
Sue, thank you very much.
You got it. See you tomorrow.
All right, our Sue Herrera. Airbus is striking a deal with Bombardier over its C-Series aircraft, and some say the deal looks like a bailout. Phil LeBeau is here to explain. Phil?
Well, certainly it's causing controversy with Boeing. You know, we saw just, a half hour ago, Boeing issuing another statement saying, we're not going to let this deal go by without some people fighting it in Washington, and certainly Boeing fighting it. Here's the deal, essentially. Airbus will take a majority stake in the C-Series plane. They're going to basically run everything in terms of sales, logistics, manufacturing of the airplane. Production may eventually be expanded to Airbus's plant in Alabama. There will also be a line up in Canada. The joint venture, by the way, was discussed by Prime Minister of Canada along with President Trump. They had a conversation about it last night. No details about that conversation. The heart of the issue are the tariffs that have been proposed by the Department of Commerce, and these are being proposed because they say, look, these planes are not being sold at market value. We think the tariff should be 299%. Well, Boeing is blasting this deal with Bombardier, saying, if you think this means that these tariffs are going away, think again. Shares of Boeing took a bit of a hit today, but the company issued a statement essentially saying, twice now within the last 24 hours, we plan to fight this deal between Airbus and Bombardier, saying this looks like a questionable deal between two heavily state-subsidized competitors to skirt the recent findings of the U.S. government. Our position remains that everyone should play by the same rules for free and fair trade to work. By the way, we're also going to show you shares of Delta because Delta is the customer, which has ordered 70 C-Series planes. Kelly, last week, when we talked to the CEO of Delta, he denied, or I shouldn't say he didn't deny, but he refused to tell us what price they have paid for these planes, which Boeing says is way below market value. That is at the heart of this complaint and ultimately the deal between Airbus and Bombardier.
But Phil, I love this story because it puts Boeing and Delta on different sides of the issue. So from Delta's point of view, they say, look, we ordered these planes because Boeing doesn't even make them. Are they right about that?
Well, that is true that they're not in that segment of the market, but they also got a good deal. Now, they're not telling us exactly what that deal is. Let's be clear. When airlines order new commercial airplanes, they never pay the list price. I mean, it's one of these things. It's listed at, what, $80 million? Nobody's paying $80 million per plane. But is it as low as Boeing suggests, which could be as low as $19 million, which Boeing is saying, look, that's way below the market value. These are essentially being dumped because Bombardier needs to sell these. That's the complaint from Boeing. Delta's response is, no, we're paying market value, and that's why we're ordering these, and we think it's a good plane. So that's the crux of the issue here. And, of course, the argument from Boeing is, hey, now you have Airbus stepping in because Bombardier is losing money on this plane.
I know. In Alabama, there's a lot of interesting angles here, but we'll see where this partnership goes and whether they do keep the tariffs on them. Phil, thank you. Speaking of tariffs, we have some news on that out of D.C. Kayla Tausche, an update on the NAFTA talks. Kayla?
Kelly, the lead trade negotiator for the United States, Ambassador Bob Lighthizer, just held a briefing with reporters following the conclusion of this fourth round of NAFTA talks. And in it, he said there is no active process to withdraw from the NAFTA deal, despite a very sharply worded statement at the conclusion of these talks where he said that he has seen no evidence that Canada and Mexico would be willing to make the concessions needed that the U.S. wants in order to make this deal work. He did say that he will consult with the president following this round ending, and we'll see what the president suggests. As to winning over Congress, which has been highly critical of material changes to this deal, they just want it to be modernized. They don't want it to be really substantially changed. He said that once the president comes around to a final deal, Congress will have to get on board with whatever plan that is if the president supports it. He said he's not surprised that business interests have been lobbying Congress because that's the way that it's always worked. On the timeline, which he announced this afternoon, they would be extending through the first quarter of next year. He said the year-end deadline was always artificial and that they viewed an ending to these talks by roughly March as an appropriate buffer between the finishing of those talks and the Mexican elections next summer. So now these negotiators are targeting the end of the first quarter. That's how far they have scheduled these talks out to. But he says it is true that some of the more difficult topics and some of the most difficult parts of the negotiation will happen toward the end. So certainly, Kelly, the plot has thickened, but he says there is no active process at this moment to withdraw from NAFTA, though he says you always think about what might happen, but there is no active process right now. Kelly?
Yeah, market's thinking through the same thing. Kayla, thank you very much. Kayla Tausche. Up next, a small hedge fund wants to break up a big European bank. We'll have those details for you. Later, the stars of the HGTV hit series Fixer Upper, Chip and Joanna Gaines, explain why they're leaving the show, and we're going to get their take on the housing market, which has been red hot, at least in Waco. That's coming up. Today, the Dow hit 23,000 in the session, but didn't close there. About 2.5 points shy, still 40 points higher today, and it was the best performer. The S&P up about 1.5 points. The Nasdaq lower by 0.5 point. The Russell's down about 5. IBM out with its earnings at the top of the hour, and the stock's actually been moving a little bit higher since that. It is now up 3.5%, trading just about $152. And now we've got some breaking news on Amazon to get to. Seema Modi, what now?
Kelly, Amazon studio chief Roy Price has resigned. This following accusations of sexual harassment by an Amazon TV producer. Keep in mind, last Thursday, Amazon said Price was on a leave of absence following these allegations. But now, spokesperson from Amazon saying Roy Price is resigning. Back to you.
Perhaps inevitable. Seema, thank you. Well, let's get to our fast take today, shall we? Michael, are you ready?
Let's do it.
We begin with a call for the banking giant Credit Suisse to break itself up into 3 parts: an investment bank, a wealth management, and an asset management unit. The call is coming from a Swiss activist hedge fund working with a former Credit Suisse exec. But the interesting thing to me is, will the big U.S. banks be pushed to do the same thing?
It's interesting. A couple of years ago, if you remember, there was a proposal out there pretty active that J.P. Morgan ought to break up, asset management, global transaction processing, and then the traditional bank, et cetera. It kind of went away. They kind of beat back that idea. I don't think you're going to see that kind of pressure to do it in the U.S. banks unless their valuations really stagnate for a while. I mean, I think they've done okay. The one to watch on that, I think, that would be a signature move would be B of A Merrill Lynch. right?
And
Which
it's
has
interesting.
only been integrated the last 8 years.
I know there's some people talk about Merrill like that these days, as if it's now this jewel that.
That's right, within B of A.
Yeah.
For a while, it wasn't really
right.
part of the whole.
It's interesting you say that. We'll see. But there is actually, that's not the only company breaking itself into three parts maybe today. Daimler is actually doing it. The Mercedes-Benz parent company announced a plan to split its cars and vans business out from trucks and buses, with mobility and financial services being the third unit. So perhaps we are seeing the start of deconglomerization after all.
We are. The pendulum, it always swings back in this direction at some point. I do think it makes sense on paper here. It always makes sense on paper, right? You can kind of get these very discrete, perfect shareholder bases.
But the spin-offs have outperformed, and they have done quite well.
They've done that for many decades. It makes sense. Also, when you have businesses here that maybe if they're not at odds, mobility, the kind of forward-looking kind of parts of the auto business may be at odds with some of the older ones.
All right, and finally, just in time for the holidays, Amazon has an early Christmas present for doormen, the ones who seem to be piled under boxes. Amazon has struck a deal with several big apartment companies, including Equity Residential and Avalon Bay, to install lockers in more than 850,000 properties. This is according to the Wall Street Journal, which is great. But what about the burbs, Michael?
Not my problem. I like this idea, especially in new construction. But in the burbs, I mean, if you have one of these great country estates, your footman or somebody just takes it in, right?
Country estate, yeah, very funny.
No, it's a big issue, though, right? I mean, whether it's a building lobby or it's a doorstep.
It's an issue for their growth. If they're taking it seriously enough to do it for the apartment buildings now, there's got to be some interesting solution for the suburbs.
Right, a neighborhood lockbox or something like that.
Replacing like the neighborhood mailbox that used to exist. I like that. Anyway, when Discovery Networks purchased Scripps cable channels this summer, HGTV was seen as one of the plums of that deal. And part of the reason for that is the smash hit series Fixer Upper with, I can't even believe this, Chip and Joanna Gaines. This is a live image. They are like 10 feet from us right now. These two might have felt a little shortchanged when the Gaines announced they were quitting the show. We're going to hear from them directly about this move and so much more right after this.
The clock is ticking, and we have reached the most crucial hour of the trading session.
Hello and welcome to Closing Bell. I'm Sonia Shenoy.
Everything could change in an instant.
You could argue that it's buy on dips. You could argue that it's sell on rally. A smart trader would say it's both.
Tune in to find out what could make or break your trades.
It's been a very good comeback for the markets.
This is a market which should rally more, maybe go to all-time highs.
As our experts analyze the market from every angle to give you the inside story.
Arvind remains a short sell even in this market.
Several individual stocks are breaking out. So Bata is a buy and Aurobindo Pharma is a buy.
Keep taking each day as an independent day and trade accordingly.
NSE Closing Bell.
A little over 3 years ago, Chip and Joanna Gaines were mildly known house flippers in Waco, Texas. And thanks to the HGTV series Fixer Upper, the couple are now a leading brand. In the series, they find and remodel rundown properties. It's led to their own line of paint, furniture, their own housing development. Joanna, both join us now here at Post 9. Welcome. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
You guys, so I started watching HGTV again after 20 years, 2 months ago when we bought a house because we were looking for. These are, do you recognize these?
I do. Those are, I think, my top 25 colors.
Okay, this is shiplap. Okay, this soft landing I'm putting in the front sitting room.
I love that.
Blackboard is going in the.
One of my favorites.
You guys,
she's good.
She is good.
I ordered the stick-on paint samples because I thought, well, if Joanna Gaines, I mean, I trust her judgment more than anybody's. Seriously, you guys, this is to have accomplished so much in such a short period of time is pretty fascinating. Chip, your book talks all about how this was kind of an accident. You wanted to be a baseball player. That's something you and Michael have.
Yeah, okay.
And
here we are. There you go. Which clearly indicates our talent level, I think.
And I love the way that you guys work together, which for a lot of people, I don't know. I mean, do you think you can keep working together, have an amazingly successful business, and consider you're being great parents and all of that? What happens now?
Yeah, I mean, Joe and I are firm believers that you can have your cake and eat it too. I mean, that's why we're living this thing out. I mean, a lot of people I feel like have to pick one or the other. You feel like you go all career and maybe the family suffers to some extent. Some people kind of weigh it opposite, and the family's the most important. That was kind of the family that I grew up in.
Yeah.
I feel like my dad turned down promotion after promotion to be home and to be at every ball game doing some of the things, which again, as a young athlete, you can probably relate to. I wouldn't have traded it for the moon. But, you know, there was one day that Joe and I, right after we had gotten married about 14 years ago, and we looked at each other and we were like, what if we could pull both of these off? Do you think it's possible? And I would say that it's extremely risky, because in theory, one might have to suffer. And honestly, that weighed a little bit into the whole concept of us deciding that the 5th season was going to be the last. We wanted to make sure that we really stepped back, made sure that Joe and I were on good footing, make sure that the kids were all doing well after 5 years of this. I mean, it feels like an eternity.
Do they like the TV cameras? What's it like for them?
I think the older they get, the more they're like, oh, we don't really, you know, I think it's more now, it seems almost like a job that they never asked for, which is what we kind of looked at and thought, you know, if they didn't ask for this, of course we need to pull back a bit. And I think a lot of that had to do with just our decision. We want this to be something where they feel like if they want to do it, they have the freedom to do it. If they don't, they're not.
The interesting thing about you guys is that honestly, I'm one of those people who didn't know much about Waco except the bad stuff before I started watching the series. And I read that you were saying they wanted maybe to start it and move it to Austin or Dallas, but you were like, no, this is Waco. It has so much potential, and now you're tapping that. Can you give us some anecdotes or some sense now that you've opened the silos and everything of just how many people are coming in? Because when we're having you guys on, makeup artists, people on the floor here, they say, oh yeah, we went to Waco last year, man, we wanted to hang out at the silos. Like, what is it, how much of a boom do you think there is?
I mean, we're thrilled to death to see this play out right before our eyes. Years ago, when we first got started, she had this little shop on Bosque. We called it the Little Shop on Bosque. And this thing was like 1,200 square feet, tiny, tiny little spot. And all of a sudden, the show comes online, and hundreds, if not thousands of people started showing up to this thing on the weekends. And so Joe and I would show up to the Little Shop on Bosque, and we'd do the dog and pony show. We'd take selfies. I mean, the whole 9 yards. Well, one thing led to another. Next thing you know, we couldn't even get in the building at all. I mean, it was just like, you know, lying around the block. And that's when we bought the silos, which is an enormous property. And now we're averaging about 30,000 people a week that come down to the silos in Waco,
Texas.
That's
a lot of cupcakes.
That is a lot of cupcakes.
A lot of people say that they've gained 5 to 10 pounds just by coming and visiting the silos, which is something we're proud of.
So 5 or so years ago, whether it was by design or not, was a pretty good time to start to kind of broadcast the opportunity of renovating homes. I mean, just talk about where the market is.
You bet.
Does the fact that you're kind of backing off from that aspect of it on television say anything about whether the market is still a good opportunity in that
I
respect?
think the market's hot. I mean, Waco, Texas has never been hotter. Literally, the state of Texas in general has never been hotter in general. So, I mean, you know, I think the market still has, from a housing perspective, a few years left in it as far as this amazing, you know, meteoric uptick that we've seen here the last 5 to 10 years.
I mean, because your whole premise is buy low, fix it up and sell better. So what happens if it's harder to find those properties?
Well, that's a great point. For guys like me, literally, the market's gotten really tight. I mean, you know, you go out and you try to buy a flip house, and you've got 10 guys competing against you, 4 of which had never done this before in their entire lives. So, you know, I mean, it's kind of
they don't know the right price. Maybe?
Yeah, a lot of times you watch these guys go and like, hey, listen, this guy won't be around too much longer. I can wait him out. But, you know, 5 or 6 out of that same 10 are seasoned pros, and you just got to know when to say no. And we turn down houses left and right, but when we get the opportunity to buy right, we love buying and selling.
I also want to show people all the different, I mentioned the paint line that you have through Kills Paint. There's also the Magnolia furniture that I've seen in Pier 1. There's the Target deal, which you just announced. Bed Bath & Beyond. Meredith publishes the mag. This is the funny thing. I start watching the show. I turn around. You guys are everywhere, which is awesome. And I know it's important to you not to have to travel too much and to kind of get, you know, for people like me who want to consume the brand, to get that out of Waco. So how do you balance that with what people say, which is, oh, but you got to stay authentic and you got to stay bespoke and you got to have local craftsmen. I mean, so what other ways can you kind of get this outside of Waco and scale it?
You know, it was important to us with our partners, and what they know is I'm a busy mom of 4. Every one of our partners literally comes to Waco, Texas. So when we're designing, when we're putting the magazine together, it all happens in Waco, Texas. So that's a huge plus that they really understood that. But I think for us, people were asking kind of from all over, can you help us with our house? And, you know, with our young children, and we don't really love to travel right now in the season of life. I think for us it was getting it out there, because our passion really is to help people in their homes, whether it be paint, whether it be decor. We feel it's all about home. It all starts there.
Let me tell you what, the Connecticut people, if you guys did a show in Connecticut, you go to season in Connecticut, they are lining up. Before you go, we always like to ask people who come on about their biggest money mistake. Chip, this is kind of the premise of your book, sort of,
Sure.
but does one come to mind in particular?
Yeah, I mean, we were all in a small development in Waco, Texas. So we had gone from what I would consider to be small flippers and renovators to we had hit a couple of doubles. And we had put a little money together, and so we went all in this particular development in Waco, Texas. And I mean, just right as the market crashed. It was like 08 is when we were daydreaming about this project. We bought it in 09 and did all the infrastructure and put all the, all the eggs in one basket come 2010, and the market just fell apart. I mean, I remember like it was yesterday that, I mean, the phone literally stopped ringing almost overnight.
I mean, was that avoidable somehow, or was it just a lesson in?
That's a tough question. I mean, I think obviously, hindsight being 2020, everything's avoidable. But for us, we love the idea of the never quit, never give up. A lot of developers, I mean, we were small time, but a lot of bigger developers, I mean, they would find themselves in a predicament like this, and they would just walk away, you know. And for us, we were like, look, this is a local bank who's trusted us with these funds. We've got a couple of people who had already bought houses in this development. So, I mean, 2 or 3 people, and we were like, we're not going to abandon this development. We know these people. We live next door to these people. So next thing you know, I mean, you go by that development today, and there are 36 beautiful houses. Looks like something you'd see in a Rockwall, Norman Rockwall calendar.
A Chip and Joanna Gaines house goes on Airbnb, and it's a premium now. There's so much more to talk about, guys. We would love for you to come back someday.
Absolutely. Had we have kept that development, 36 of those would now be Airbnb properties, I can assure you.
Exactly. You should think about a satellite camera in Waco that we can talk to you. Thank you again. Chip and Joanna
Thank you for having us.
When we come right back, we will have today's closing word, and we'll tell you what it is right after this.